Disney's Star Wars has been struggling for the last several years, with many longtime Star Wars fans essentially just writing off the entire Disney era of Star Wars, accepting the fact that it's no longer George Lucas's Star Wars. It's a completely different entity, and it should pretty much be disregarded from many longtime Star Wars fans. And right now, it's looking like even the Star Wars creator, George Lucas himself, has said that, yeah, he doesn't really care about Star Wars, or at least that's kind of the impression that he's getting with these latest statements from him. But before I really dive into this, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you can, leave a comment and hit the like button too, because it helps out with the channel. George Lucas says, "I've moved past Star Wars after Disney took it over and gave it their vision." Now, I think it's kind of funny that he mentions that they gave it their vision, a way to try to separate Disney Star Wars from his Star Wars, because prior to Disney acquiring it, he kind of had a bad name within the Star Wars community. Now, a lot of people loved George Lucas after the original trilogy, then the prequel trilogy came about, and it kind of divided the Star Wars fan base to a certain point, with many older Star Wars fans not really liking the prequel trilogy. And George Lucas kind of had a bad rap as a result of all that. But since Disney took it over, many of the people who are critical over the prequel trilogies are now starting to look at it and be like, you know what? They might not have been as good as the original trilogy, but at least it's leaps and bounds better than what Disney has created. And a lot of people who were critical over George Lucas in the past are now pining for the days where George Lucas could return, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen because George Lucas doesn't want to come back. It's been 13 years since George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney for $4 billion, while Star Wars fans have been waiting patiently for the legendary filmmaker to step back behind the camera to shoot another movie. He's actually been busy working on opening a museum. The project has reportedly cost the 81-year-old at least $1 billion to put together, and the Lucas Museum of Narrative Arts is now on track to open in Los Angeles next year. As the name suggests, it will showcase narrative art, but much of to the disappointment of some, it isn't a movie museum or even a journey through Lucas's storied career. Now, I think it's kind of interesting that George Lucas isn't going to make it a Star Wars museum or even just a filmmaking museum, but just a museum dedicated to narrative arts. And, you know, in all honesty, it does sound like it's something that I would be interested in going to see, a museum like this. I mean, if it was George Lucas putting on a movie museum, I think that would be even cool. I think that'd be pretty cool right there. And George Lucas definitely could make a whole museum just dedicated to his career, because he has a pretty expansive career within the filmmaking industry. But no, he doesn't want to do that. He just wants to make it dedicated to narrative art. But one thing that is surprising is how little attention he's actually paying to Star Wars within this museum, because that is the one big franchise that he's most known for, either that or Indiana Jones. And George Lucas kind of, I wouldn't say he wants to disconnect himself from Star Wars entirely, but he doesn't just, or at least he comes across as not wanting to be known just for Star Wars, or at least he doesn't want this museum just to be about Star Wars. It's one gallery out of 33, and I did it grudgingly, a seemingly exacerbated Lucas said. "I didn't want people to come to the museum and say, 'Where's the Star Wars?' It will house an N1 starfighter from 1999, Star Wars The Phantom Menace, but only one exhibit will be devoted to a galaxy far, far away, and more specifically, its vehicle design." Okay, I mean, I think that's enough for what he at least claims he's wanting to do with it. Addressing the current state of the franchise and how he now views the world he created, Lucas said, "Disney took it over and they gave it their vision. That's what happens. Of course, I've moved past it. I mean, I've got a life. I'm building a museum. A museum is harder than making movies." Okay, so he kind of wants to move on from Star Wars, but it does really feel like he's trying to separate what Disney is doing versus what he created with Star Wars, because it's plainly obvious to anyone paying attention that Disney is not following what George Lucas intended for the franchise. In fact, when they took it over, he gave them an outline on what he planned for the future of Star Wars if he was actually to produce movies. Kathleen Kennedy basically said, like, "Yeah, we'll take this into consideration. We want to make sure we're staying true to your vision of Star Wars, because you know the franchise, you know the whole universe. So we'll just kind of go off of this blueprint, but kind of do our own thing with it." George Lucas agreed to those terms. And as soon as he left, they're like, "Okay, let's just throw this crap out. We got our own thing to do." And we want to, or Kathleen Kennedy wanted to put her own stamp on the Star Wars franchise. And that's something that audiences have overwhelmingly rejected in the past. I was the one who really knew what Star Wars was, who actually knew this world, because there's a lot to it. He shared the Force, for example. Nobody understood the Force when they started other ones after I sold the company. A lot of the ideas that were in the original sort of got lost, but that's the way it is. You give it up, you give it up. And it does come across as George Lucas is, I wouldn't necessarily say bitter. That's probably a little bit too strong of a word for this, but he does seem to be kind of annoyed with Disney and how they treated the Star Wars franchise since taking it over, because like I said, they didn't approach it with the reverence or wanting to be respectful to the source material or to George Lucas's vision for the Star Wars franchise. They came across that, or at least Kathleen Kennedy comes across as someone who has kind of a chip on her shoulder, who basically wanted to, if not destroy the legacy of George Lucas, but wanted to take it over and make it her own legacy. And that's something that audiences has overwhelmingly rejected. Like we saw when it came to The Acolyte, that was basically peak Kathleen Kennedy Star Wars. This is basically the Star Wars that she wanted it to be and was trying to work towards it. And we saw not only that audiences overwhelmingly rejected it, but Disney kind of did an unprecedented move and announced shortly after the series concluded that no, it is canceled. And this is something that Disney generally doesn't like to do. They don't like to announce that they're canceling projects or something like that, because they want to kind of leave it open for possibilities in the future. But the show was performing so poorly and it was so divisive towards audiences, they tried to reassure their shareholders by like, okay, don't worry about The Acolyte. We know that was terrible. We're not going to make any more of that. I know we lost a lot of money, so just be calm because we're not going to make that same mistake again. Now, to be fair to Disney, some of their other projects for Disney Plus have performed a little bit better and or was more well received than what we saw with other Disney Plus Star Wars shows. But one of the problems with that is by this point, audiences have just kind of checked out entirely. Andor was supposed to get 3 seasons, but they saw after the poor performance of the first season, but it was well received. So they're like, okay, let's try to wrap it up in season 2. But it was supposed to get 3 seasons, and that's never going to happen because the audiences just wasn't there, even though the show was well received. Now, the next big thing that we have for Star Wars is The Mandalorian and Grogu, and that's the first theatrical release since Solo came out. And it's looking like the appetite for that just isn't there. I mean, I'm not saying that people are just outright hating it, because you can see the trailer for it is currently sitting at 141,000 likes to 51,000 dislikes. But I don't know, is it just me, or does the view count for this seem a little bit weak compared to what you would think for a Star Wars project? Like, it's hard to kind of go back and see, like, after 3 weeks that this has been out, it has a little bit less than 10 million views. I would imagine a Star Wars project, especially the first theatrical release in quite a long time, would get a little bit more excitement than what we're getting with this. But it does seem like general audiences just don't care, or at least they're not excited with Star Wars anymore. Part of that is because of oversaturation with the Disney Plus market, where Star Wars doesn't feel like it's something special anymore. And part of it, I think, has to deal with the fact that people just don't trust the Star Wars brand anymore. We saw the downfall when it came to the Disney trilogy when it first came out. You got The Force Awakens, generated over $2 billion globally. Then after The Last Jedi, it still generated over $1 billion, 1.3 billion. But that's significantly less than what we saw with The Force Awakens. And then we got The Rise of Skywalker. Okay, so I made a mistake. This Mandalorian and Grogu isn't the last movie since Solo. It meant it was the last movie since The Rise of Skywalker. But The Rise of Skywalker, that only made $1 billion globally at the box office. And now that's still a lot of money, but it's half of what we saw with The Force Awakens, which just goes to show as time went on, audiences' excitement for Star Wars has kind of dwindled. That was already in the pipeline. It finished the trilogy off, and then they've kind of put all the Star Wars projects on the shelves since then. Solo was one of their movies that they released in between this, but that was kind of faced backlash because of The Last Jedi. And that ended up losing money for them at the box office. And then since then, Disney has kind of panicked and put a pause on all their Star Wars related content right now until The Mandalorian and Grogu. So I guess we're going to have to wait and see what happens with that. But I'm not really holding out, or I'm not expecting that one to do really great, especially since it's basically just a recycled Disney Plus series that they're kind of cutting it down and to make it a movie, which honestly, that's probably a good move on their part, because a lot of their Disney Plus Star Wars series come across as a movie that they just stretched out into a series on Disney Plus. So I guess it's probably better that they just cut out all the filler and just make it a little bit more streamlined. I think it would probably be a lot better than what we saw with season 3 of The Mandalorian. But we've already saw that The Mandalorian was the best thing Disney has released since The Rise of Skywalker. And even then, the audience reaction to that has kind of dwindled over time. So this sentiment by George Lucas kind of wanting to separate himself from Star Wars, you can almost see that in the audience as well, from the people who grew up on Star Wars with the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. They're basically just done with Star Wars at this point too. And Disney basically paid $4 billion, or it wasn't all for Star Wars. There was Indiana Jones and other things, but they paid a lot of money for a franchise, presumably because it had a huge built-in fan base. And what did Kathleen Kennedy do as soon as she acquired it? Basically disregarded that whole fan base and be like, okay, this is the fan base for it. We paid billions of dollars for this. I don't want that fan base. I want to try to build up this new fan base and basically make Star Wars a girls brand. And come to find out, the girls who weren't interested in Star Wars, or if the girls were interested in Star Wars, they would have already been interested prior to Kathleen Kennedy getting her hands on it. After she changed it, the people who they were trying to actually appeal to with Star Wars have kind of checked out, and the girls that they were trying to bring in were not interested in Star Wars to begin with, and that's why they weren't already watching it. So basically, Disney paid billions of dollars for a fan base that they just tossed out in order to try to build a new fan base up, which they would have been better suited just trying to start from scratch, as opposed to just bastardize something that someone else created. But let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Do you think George Lucas is maybe a little bit upset with Disney and how they treated Star Wars, or do you think he's just an old man wanting to move on to something else because he spent enough time with Star Wars that he doesn't really care about it one way or the other? Comment below. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to hit the like button and share the video out there because it helps out with the channel. Thank you.